Okay, so slightly later than originally planned by a few minutes, we've gone live. Now, over the weekend, obviously, the channel has passed 650 subscribers. That's why this is a sort of a special in a way. So to say thank you. Obviously, it's taken a bit longer to get to 650 subscribers than originally I would have liked, but we got there in the end. And here we are. As you can see, I'm wearing my new latest Bracknell Bees jersey. I'm not as keen on this jersey as previous jerseys. The white jersey hasn't been released yet, which I find annoying because it looks better than the black one, but it is what it is. And yes, the game last night was the first 20 minutes. Considering that I obviously couldn't make the Saturday game, the first 20 minutes was possibly the worst 20 minutes I've seen a hockey team play that has won the night before and has scored 5 goals. To then follow that up with a 6-1 defeat and 4-0 down after 20 minutes was absolutely diabolical. I will say, yes, this jersey is what better than last year. I didn't like last year's jerseys very much. They also feel better material, I think, and they've got the breathable air pockets. They are absolutely better design, better material, more comfortable to wear, and I think better value for money. I think Jersey 53 have come up with a better jersey than the previous 2 years. I'm gonna say that now, but I prefer looking at what the white one looks like. The white one looks sharper. Much sharper than Bracknell's defence last night. I'm not going to stick on the hockey too long, but I will discuss it. I've never seen, even in a pre-season game, a team so lacking in intensity, so lacking in just aggression. They looked all over the place, and I call it zone control. And this is something you'll see in a lot of sports in a defensive and attacking sense. Control of the space that the player is occupying. There was not enough control of the attacking zone, the neutral zone, and the defensive zone. And you can argue the same in rugby league, rugby union, and football. There wasn't enough aggression in defence, and there wasn't enough cohesion in attack. And we know Kovar was injured, and he did take part in the pre-match warm-up. So that says to me that they're assessing his injury. It's not that serious. They're looking after him. It is pre-season. You want to have him fit and ready to go on the first opening night of the regular season against Peterborough. Absolutely, but Goss and goal, Jesus. I've seen colanders and sieves that retain better water. I've seen buckets with bullet holes in that keep water better than that. The fourth goal was absolutely embarrassing. I've never seen a goalkeeper dive on his stomach. Football, hockey, field hockey, hurling. I've never seen a goalie thinking, rather than diving to the side and forcing the puck out forwards, I'm going to dive on it and shovel it. Terrible technique. He only lasted 20 minutes, and I think it's safe to say he will not be the starting goaltender come the match against Peterborough. I don't think he'll even start against the Raiders for the next 2 games in the pre-season. Swindon, on the other hand, I obviously not having been able to watch the the guy with the blue pads was Goss. That's meant to be our starter. He's played in the Elite League. I've never seen a goalie who's played in the Elite League and been part of Elite League organisations, including the Milton Keynes Lightning, be absolutely as hopeless as that. He's played a handful of games in the Elite League. He's been part of the Manchester Storm. He's been part of the Milton Keynes Lightning. Oh my God. There's a reason why he's not even a regular backup at the Elite League level. Danny Milton. Danny Milton knows what he's doing. And his stats last year back that up. He was a very capable backup. When he had to be called upon to start in the majority of games, he actually has some pretty good numbers. He's also a big goalkeeper, and he's very, very good at positioning. I think he's developed very, very well. The first goal we didn't have much chance with in the second period. Bearing in mind he's been sat on the bench, your muscles cramp up, and it was a bullet. It was a damn good shot over the right shoulder. The second one, I think he could have had it. I think if he was to look at video footage of that, he would want that one back. But considering the black hole that the defence and the player, every single player in front of him had got the team in by that point, to get ice time and get a feel of the puck and and get a feel of what it's like to play with some new teammates and some existing teammates. I think he looks very likely to be the main man this season. I don't think Goss is going to hang around very long. I know we've signed another previous Elite League goaltender as our third choice, partly for coaching reasons, and I think partly as injury cover. But I don't think Goss is going to stick around very, very long. Interesting to see what's going to happen next weekend. I will hopefully make the Saturday game. I'm not so keen. I understand why they've changed the face-off times, but I'm not 100% keen on it. It's going to take some getting used to. That could have had an effect on how they played, but a lot of teams have decided to bring forward their start times on Sundays especially. So I think it's a league-wide thing that a lot of them are making changes to start times. The Elite League is going to be interesting as well this year. Obviously, we've seen the Champions Hockey League already, competitive matches being played. I've been really impressed with the British teams in the Champions Hockey League when I've been able to catch highlights, and I've caught a full game of the Belfast Giants against the Augsburg Panther, and they were unlucky to lose that game, and there was a controversial no-goal call. But I want to, not just stick on hockey for the entire live stream, because I understand there's people who want to ask questions about the Ashes, and the football, and with Danny Drinkwater's in trouble. The Rugby World Cup's coming up, and that's a big talking point because now these warm-up matches for the Rugby Union World Cup are done. We've got the Rugby League, the NRL finals, London Broncos taking their survival fight in the Super League to the final day of the season and have a very good chance of beating Wakefield, because Wakefield have wobbled at times this season. And we've got the GB Lions tour down to New Zealand, Tonga, and Papua New Guinea in the Rugby League as well this autumn. So it's going to be a really busy autumn, and all three of the GB Lions games are going to be televised on the BBC, which is great. And there is an Australian tour next year. The NRL finals have been confirmed. So there's a few things to talk about. But no, the hockey, you can keep asking hockey questions later on. But yes, no, the Elite League, if you've trained at a higher level and you train with better players, you would expect the technique to be better. But there is a reason why Goss hasn't really even got a backup job in the Elite League. There's a reason why he's dropped down a level. It's not because there's not space for him in the Elite League. I think there's a lot more British born goaltenders getting a run, but I think it's generally there's problems with his technique, his confidence maybe. Clearly, the reason why he got an Elite League contract was he's shown something at junior level. He's shown something about his play, but I think maybe it's a technique thing. It's most likely a confidence thing. The mascot, Jesus Christ. I used to do that as a job, and I pity the guy wearing the suit because it gets hot in there. It gets very hot in them things, and they're not as comfortable to wear as you think. On the cricket side of things, I know there's going to be people asking about cricket and what happened with the Ashes going back to Australia and then retaining the Ashes. Part of it's to do with Steve Smith being a key component of that, and the debate about Smith, Warner, and Bancroft, should they be allowed to play for Australia again, and the whole fallout from what happened last year against South Africa and in Cape Town. David Warner has not shown much with the bat in this series. He's not scored well. Steve Smith, however, yes. I think Steve Smith, it was a mistake making him captain of Australia, and I think England made the same mistake with Joe Root. I think the issue with England and Australia is they're very bowler-heavy lineups. You take one or two key batsmen out of their batting lineups, and they struggle. And Australia struggled without Steve Smith, and England are struggling without a real dominant upper order batsman. Joe Root is not captain material. Jason Roy is not test material, and they keep altering the lineup. And when you've got a bowler heavy team, and both teams do, and a wobbly batting lineup, which again both teams do, you can see why there's been a lot of all outs and where teams have been bowled out, and the bowling figures of some bowlers are there. Both sides have got really good bowling attacks and some good young players coming through. I feel sorry for players like Sam Curran who've missed out in the last couple of tests, who I think should be on the side. He's proven himself as a young up-and-coming player that he can handle pressure, whereas some of the young players currently in the team who've played the last couple of tests have proven that they're not good enough. I don't know how long Joe Root remains captain, personally. I think it was a mistake to give him the captaincy. His batting figures have completely and utterly collapsed. His batting form is nowhere near what it was before he was captain. It is known that when you take on a more responsible role within a cricket team, that your bowling or batting figures will dipped somewhat, but not as much as Joe Roots has. And he's actually got if you look at his record, his test record isn't as good as it could be. If you want to look at the football, Gareth Southgate's faced some criticism for his starting lineup against Bulgaria. The thing is, we won the game, but that first half against Bulgaria, not good enough. Plain and simple. Yeah, they got a 1-0 lead, and they took that into half time. And that's what you want to expect. It's not going to be easy against a team like Bulgaria. They're going to be physical. They're going to be defensive. They're going to be organised. But when you've got two holding midfielders against a team like Bulgaria, which doesn't have a lot of pace, which is an older team with a higher average age, so some of these players are in their mid to late 30s. 7 of their starting lineup were over the age of 30. You want to have pacey players who drive with the ball, and having two holding midfielders. Declan Rice and Jordan Henderson did their job perfectly. I'm not disputing that. And Declan Rice played really, really well. And the debate about him, should he play for Ireland or England, is mute point at this point because he's selected in the side, he's played. But when you've got players like Sancho on the bench and Sterling, who's I think better up the middle than out wide, when he gets the ball at his feet, he causes problems. And he scored his goal by being in the middle. He scored his goal by being a poacher in the box. You want to utilise that. And in the first half, there wasn't enough pace on the ball, and there wasn't enough of an intense high press at pace. It was all done too lethargically. And Kosovo, people are like, oh, it's only Kosovo we're playing tomorrow night. But you look at their coach's press conference, and you look how the fact they haven't lost a competitive international for 2 years. I don't care the fact that they've only been a nation for a few years, and I don't read too much of the fact that they've not been playing international football as a team for very, very long. But when you've got a team that hasn't lost a competitive international for 2 years, as your next opponent, you do not want to play how England played against Bulgaria. They could lose that game. Absolutely, they could lose that game. The second half was better by England, but for a team whose core has been together for so long, the amount of misplaced passes and offsides they had in that entire game, where be it Sterling or Rashford or Kane, Sancho, whoever was the player meant to be receiving the ball offside. We had a goal ruled offside because Harry Kane doesn't have the pace to get in behind, so he has to be on that last shoulder, or he has to use his movement. There was a lack of movement for the first half. You look at the first half, apart from the offside, apart from the offside goal and the penalty, Harry Kane's movement was non-existent. Okay, how he gets away with it with Tottenham, I don't know. But it was very evident with the slow pace in midfield and the slow, methodical build-up play. There was no movement up front, so it does slow down the build-up play. If you have players just moving and making weird runs and just doing anything, it makes the defenders have to think, who is going to pick this guy up? And when you've got a defence like Bulgaria that is organised, but slow, you want to have pacey runs in behind by faster players. Harry Kane to be that hold-up guy, and then you bring other players into play. This is why I'm surprised that Southgate allowed Jamie Vardy to announce his retirement and say, I'm walking away. Jamie Vardy, while he's not as prolific a goal scorer as Harry Kane is, he's still one of the top goal scorers in the Premier League. He has won a Premier League title, and he pushed Harry Kane all the way in that Premier League winning season for Leicester for the golden boot in the Premier League. And he likes that ball over the top. He likes making those runs because he creates space for the other centre forward. And this is where I find some of Southgate's tactics head scratching. And while we have improved our goals from open play, and we've got 2 goals from open play in the game, one of them came from Bulgaria trying to play like Barcelona, which they're not capable of doing, and the other one came from Raheem Sterling's thigh. So we're still heavily reliant on the set piece. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you want to play expansive football, when you're at your best playing expansive counter-attacking football, the fact that most of the goals are still coming from set plays is a concern. I still think that it's a work in progress, but if you've got these young, talented, hungry players wanting to attack with pace, let them go. Let them be organised in defence. Absolutely, that's where coaching is important. But sometimes just say the shackles are off and do your thing. You've got to allow the players to express themselves and play with freedom. And that's where you get the best attack, when they pass and move and they make the space themselves and they work the little combinations with their teammates. They've done this at youth level. They can do it at senior level. Do I think England are a top 3 team in Europe right now? The Dutch are struggling in their qualifying group. Germany have looked human the last couple of years. Spain have got flaws because, again, the politics of Spanish football is dividing that national side, not down the middle, but into separate groups of the various clubs from both Madrid, Barcelona, Bilbao, all that. They're all having those internal divisions rear their ugly head. Italy aren't the force that they were. The Scandinavian countries have declined as national teams. France, I think how they won the World Cup by being hard to beat, not because they were overly expansive at times. At times, they defensively, I have no idea how they got through that World Cup and won. They were in a really strong position in the World Cup final, and Croatia nearly got back, nearly took it to extra time. France had Croatia by the cluster, and they nearly threw it away. You look at the final score and the fact Croatia got some late goals, so that could have gone to extra time. That could have been a whole different kettle of fish. But I think we've got in a period of football now where I actually honestly believe, and I'm saying this honestly, the skill level and the quality level is not what it was 20 years ago. I honestly believe 20 years ago, the ability level of the top players and the top teams was better than it is now. I think we've got too many overpaid players and not enough playing for the joy of the game. When you've got players like Danny Rose, who admittedly, yes, he makes some strong points in his condemnation of racism and away from FIFA not taking enough action. But when he says that 50 grand a week is not enough for him to live on, he wants 100 grand a week. I'm sorry. If he's getting paid more than what the average salary was for a top flight player back in 1992 a week, and he says that's a top salary for a year, and he says that's not enough a week, that says to me something has gone very, 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 very wrong. Japan or USA can be an unlikely World Cup winner. I'm assuming you're talking about rugby union rather than football, because I don't think I don't think the USA men's team, when it comes to football, is in the right position to even contemplate winning a World Cup. Women's team for both Japan and USA have obviously won the World Cups, right? And the women's side of things, Japan and the USA have won the Women's World Cup, and they've been to back-to-back finals, and they're big rivals. But in the men's game, I think Japan will be closer than the USA of winning a World Cup in football. When it comes to rugby union, I think the US and Japan have the money there. They have the corporate sponsorship. They have the growing, strengthening domestic leagues that they have, and some of their top players have played at some top clubs. Football, I think the USA men's setup has problems, and even the women's setup, I don't think that's going to continue forever with their success. For all the success they had at this World Cup, I think long term, while the MLS is growing in quality and in size, and the fan base is there, you can't just become world champions overnight. You have to put in a lot of effort and a lot of work and build and build and build and build and build. I think the USA issues are with youth development, and I don't know where you go, where you can really put your finger on it, but I do think the women's team are obviously better, more successful, better, won trophies, being a dominant team in their form of the game for 20, 30 years. The investment's been put in there. They have a good ethic in the sense that they win. Whether they're liked or not is irrelevant to me. I'm not a big fan of some of their players, and it's not because they're good. It's not because they're women. It's because of the way they present themselves. They want to have this equal pay argument. Now, the women's game does not bring the money in worldwide, and while they may be more financially successful because of tickets sold for international games, it's at club level. When you're looking at club level, the women's game has no money. There's a reason why the women's professional leagues in the USA keep folding. It's not for lack of fans. It's not for lack of quality of the women's team. It's financial viability, and they cannot get a decent media rights deal with the broadcasters and the internet streaming providers. The MLS has got an international TV rights deal. We can get and watch MLS games live in this country on Premier Sports and Free Sports. So the MLS has sold its TV rights to Europe. The MLS has got network deals in the US and Canada. It gets put on major networks and websites, streaming websites that are legal. You can pay for them across the world. The women's game doesn't. And yeah, Spain won their only World Cup in 2010, or their first World Cup in 2010, sorry, should we say. But they went a long time between winning international accolades. I think they won the Euros in the 60s, and then they went 40 years nearly without any international success. And that's partly due to the politics, of Spanish football. What do I make of Steve Hansen blaming the Tonga sport from the Six Nations? I think that is absolute tosh. Steve Hansen has had the best set of players in the world to work with for the better part of a decade. Tonga have not had the best set of players available because countries like New Zealand nick their best players for a variety of reasons, under residency rules, under switching nationality, all sorts. That is a load of BS. Part of the problem is, however, that in Super Rugby, the actual salaries are lower than in France and England and the Pro 14. You can get paid more in Europe than you can in Super Rugby. Super Rugby has a money problem and has had a money problem for a very, very, very long time. There's a reason why Western Force aren't a Super Rugby franchise. There's a reason why the Melbourne Rebels have money issues. There's a reason why the two South African teams have had to go to the Pro 14. There's a reason why the Sunwolves weren't supported. There's a reason why stadiums are half filled. Super Rugby does have a problem. They cannot fill stadiums in the regular season, and that's your bread and butter. That's where you make your money. I think New Zealand and South Africa especially produce too many players for the professional level. They have a great youth production line that goes on to senior level, and they want to keep having a professional career. And unfortunately, there's not enough roster spaces and enough money in the Southern Hemisphere that they go to the Northern Hemisphere and then they become eligible for selection. The selection rules. South Africa's a bit more flexible with their selection rules, but New Zealand you have to be domestically based. There is no special dispensation rule like the Matt Giteau rule for Australia or South Africa being flexible. Same with England. I find that bizarre. I think they need to look at the centralised contract system. They need to look at the franchise Super Rugby system, and they need to look at a whole variety of things, because World Rugby tried to fiddle with how the international game works. They haven't really looked at how the club game works. Look, coaches will say things to make a point, but the Six Nations is the biggest selling product in rugby union after the World Cup, and the TV rights debate is ongoing. I think free to air is the way to go, and the fact that they have multiple broadcasters on free to air TV in this country, in the UK, broadcasting the tournament has breathed fresh life into it a little bit. To put that solely on Sky, fans would ultimately turn away and in disgust. And this is something rugby's got to be careful of. The club game has gone down this route, and as you can see clearly, having all the club games, for the most part, the majority of club games, be it cup or domestic, on subscription TV, hasn't actually benefited rugby union, because there's still massive money problems with the sport. Same with rugby league. Crowds are declining in rugby league, and on the whole, the London Broncos notwithstanding and packing out Trailfinders, but that's only a small stadium. Rugby league has, especially in this country, has issues filling grounds, whereas in Australia and New Zealand, they can sell out a suburban 20,000 seater stadium with ease. If they want to, they could sell out Suncorp in Brisbane with ease. The Broncos haven't been as good this season, but they have done in the past. So the NRL crowds are better than Super League crowds, but this is also regional variations and ticket pricing and cost of living and a whole host of a variety of reasons why certain sports are struggling for crowd numbers and what others do. There are various permutations to look at with that, but we'll get to the NRL in a bit. There's a big story that's developing in the NRL that has big implications going forward for the team in question. It's to do with their stadium. Cricket, yeah, cricket. The ECB is actually pretty much dancing to Sky Sports' tune. If Sky Sports decides not to extend their TV deal, or even share the rights with free to air TV, where another broadcast comes in and says, look, we can at least show domestic cricket, be it test level, one days, T20s, the county game, make it more accessible, then yeah, cricket's going to continue to have attendance problems. While the test matches have been really well sold out, it's because it's the Ashes. It's the Ashes. The Ashes sells. The fact that Sky has realised, Ben Stokes notwithstanding, he's a Kiwi anyway, they had their highest ever viewership figures on Sky Sports for cricket in 15 years. They only peaked 2.8 million. They put the Cricket World Cup final on Channel 4 as well as Sky Sports. 90% of people watched on Channel 4 because it's free. And that was 9 point something million people watched that Cricket World Cup final. Most of them were on free to air TV. They've started to realise they're losing the battle. And when I talk to people, a lot of them are very anti-Sky having the 100 format, which they pushed for with the ECB, because it's a marketing kind of thing that the TV company wants. The ECB basically can't refuse what Sky wants. Sky has them by the balls. And yeah, that's affecting attendance because the county game is getting sod all attention. It's all about Test cricket on Sky now, which Channel 4 used to show some county games, ironically, especially the one-day games and early T20. And ITV had the IPL. That's been taken away, and cricket has suffered as a result. And the viewership figures on TV aren't great. Ben Stokes and the World Cup final notwithstanding, and Ben Stokes having one decent innings this Ashes series notwithstanding, no, the figures are shit. I'm not going to lie, the viewing figures are absolutely crap. One good test innings and one final don't make up the fact that Sky basically is basically helped destroy domestic cricket in this country. And there's a big debate about the ECB's governance and the 100 format that no one wants, apart from the ECB and Sky, because Sky have basically said we want something to sell on TV. Because Sky are also finding they've got dwindling viewership figures. People are switching off subscription TV because, unfortunately, the subscription TV companies, especially sport, haven't realised, and if they have, that VPNs are a thing. So they spend so much money trying to shut down illegal streams and VPNs that they're actually wasting their time. It's a sign that people say we want it more accessible and more, and either cheaper or free. And you know, I have to agree that the current economics in place, with the uncertainty economically going forward with this whole political mess in Westminster, we're not going to go into politics on this, but it does have an impact. Yeah. And look at football. Look at football, especially the lower leagues in football, especially in this country and Scotland. Yeah, there is a problem with attendances there and financial viability of clubs because, again, Sky and to a certain extent BT as well. Because Murdoch basically controlled most of the British media for 25 years, and people are starting to turn against Sky. BT is hemorrhaging money because it's poor quality, poor quality production values, poor quality punditry. BT are having to borrow commentators and pundits from other channels and have them on two-way contracts, so to speak. Jake Humphrey is not worth £1 million a year. I'm sorry. They have to borrow Gary Lineker from the BBC for their football coverage. The F1 coverage on Sky is Martin Brundle. They can keep him. Martin Brundle on ITV and Channel 4 and BBC. My God, listen. When Martin Brundle retired from racing, he was a hard and fair racer. But when he got into doing the punditry for the F1 broadcasting, oh my God, his grid walks were painful, absolutely painful. And now they've taken away the free-to-air coverage of F1. I'm glad. The sport has got massive problems. Some of the teams don't want to sign up to Liberty Media's plans to make the racing more equal, with all the cars on the grid having exactly the same chance to win. Because Ferrari and Mercedes are threatening to throw their toys out the pram if they don't get their way. The regulations are all wrong. There's too much tech now. It's got to the point now where it's too much tech, and and not enough mechanical side of things. Um, and I think, oh yeah, you absolutely should have joint rights, free to wear and subscription. At least to put some of the games on free to wear, various things. Boxing to a point, yes. Champions League in the past, yes, and it worked. And unfortunately, the powers that be have decided that nah, we're going to screw over the consumer because it's got to a point where, unfortunately, greed has overtaken things because the players, the drivers, the boxers, they all want more money. They've got greedy, very very greedy, stupidly greedy, and the promoters and their agents have got greedy, and the people that they fight for or play for or race for or um, whatever have also got greedy, and the fan, so you and me, the end result is worse off. We were told with this Sky TV and BT Sport, ticket prices would stay low for the common fans, so you can still go down to support your local rugby, football, cricket, whatever team it is. Right? Why is it then the fans are protesting over ticket prices? Why is it then in the Euros 2020 we're going to Baku again, even though UEFA have been roundly condemned for holding the Europa League final there? In the Euros next year, Baku is a host city. This Euro 2020 is the group stage is going to be a nightmare for teams, absolute nightmare, because it's not in one country; it's across a whole continent, and UEFA have chased the money, and it's going to backfire. I expect crowds to be lower than anticipated, and I expect fans to really not be happy, not just from the UK, but across Europe, not be happy with some of the travel schedule. I think UEFA have been greedy, and there's a reason why it will not be repeated as a cross continental event. It's a one off. UEFA have looked at it and gone, we've made a mistake. We've made a mistake. And the backlash they faced from fans over the ticket allocations for the Baku final, especially, hasn't gone unnoticed. It doesn't matter. It was two English teams. It could have been two. It could have been two Spanish teams, two French teams, two German teams, two Italian teams. They plan that final 3 years in advance. Look at other sports. Especially in North America. They can plan a final with a week's notice. Look at the Stanley Cup. Okay, yes, it's a 7-game series, and you play both home and away. You play at each other's arenas, but you think about it. You've got an Eastern and Western Conference of the United States and Canada. That's a big continent. They can organise a final with a week's notice. Why couldn't UEFA have chosen a different venue? I don't give a fuck. But football's got enough money in it. It's clearly not benefiting the fans because the ticket price was absolutely disgusting. £5,500 a ticket. That's nearly half. That's nearly a third of my yearly wage for a ticket. So the average fan can't afford to go. What we got here? Jurgi Löw, for the German national side. He signed a contract extension before the last World Cup, and the compensation to get him out of that, if they were to sack him, would be huge. Plus, he has developed a lot of players. You can't expect a team to win every single game. He has, I think, they've been there too long, but I think the German Federation have got themselves into a bit of a dark hole because while he was Klinsmann assistant, and Klinsmann got to a semi-final in their host World Cup in 2006. It was a natural progression, and I don't think Oliver Bierhoff is quite ready yet to take over. I think that's the plan: is to have Bierhoff or one of Jurgi Löw's assistants to take that next step. But he clearly he's won a World Cup for them. They're not going to just bin him. I think his next step is to win the Euros. But this German team might have peaked. The group of players that are available at the top level, the best German players, may not be as good as the best German players. How do I put it? When they won the World Cup in 2014, I think the group has peaked, but that is what it is. James Haskell joining Bellator. Well, he retired because of a foot and ankle injury, and there's a lot of kicks in mixed martial arts. So I have no idea. At the age of 34, 35, I think that is a big risk. Considering the amount of injuries and concussions, that is a massive risk for him to take. I understand why he's done it. He wants to keep fit and he has that drive and that competitive nature. And he's a gym monkey. I have gone to school with the lad. I know what he's all about. But it's a big risk and it could be an absolute embarrassing failure. But um, we'll see what happens next year. He's not scheduled slated to fight until next year, and he has been training for a long time as a player, as a rugby player. He was training with MMA fighters to get his core up, work on some of the physical side of play, like the tackle area, and to improve his ruck and maul technique. So while he is a brand new a rookie fighter, he's not actually a rookie if you think about it. But it is a big step to go from retiring from a sport that he's played for 20 odd years since he was a kid, where he's retired because of a chronic foot and ankle problem, to go into a sport where your feet and your legs, there's a lot of kicks. It's a lot of kicks in martial arts, especially mixed martial. It depends what type of martial art he's been doing. But I've got friends who do MMA, and there's a lot of kicks in there. So if you've had a foot or ankle injury, that could be interesting to see how that affects him. And if it's his standing leg or his kicking leg as well, that's going to be very interesting to see how he does. The women hosting the Euros in 2021, England. Look, this country's hosted some big events in a variety of sports for both men and women. We've seen, the Commonwealth Games, Glasgow and Manchester. We've seen the Olympics. We've had the Rugby Union World Cup. We've got the Rugby League World Cup the same year. And we've had that also in 2013. We've had Euro 96 back in the day when I was a kid. We can host big events. You know, I think it's a good thing. I think, you know, it doesn't matter. It could be we've got the men's Euros semi-finals and final at Wembley. So, and we're getting the Rugby League World Cup as well. We've just had the Cricket World Cup, the Women's Netball World Cup. The UK has hosted some really big sporting tournaments of the team sports, and we do it very, very well. And we have the facilities in place. It's not as if we have to build loads of new stadiums and loads of infrastructure. It's there. I think it's going to be a good event, and I hope the public get behind it. Oh yeah, the attempted mugging. I think Mesut Ozil and I forget the teammate with him. It could be racially motivated as well because they're both Muslim players, which is concerning if it's a racially motivated attack, which we've seen a lot of racism online towards players of color and players of a certain faith. But I think I forget the other player. I know it's his teammate. He's the Bosnian in the side. It is concerning that there was a follow-up attack as well, and there were threats against them. I think that's more of a racial element than a religious element to it. It's still worrying, but players who played up for Everton and Liverpool, have also had their houses burgled multiple times, and that's why players have asked to be transferred out and asked to go out on loan somewhere else. From the Liverpool Manchester area, it's happened to a lot of players in the northwest where they've been targeted for burglary and various other things. It's because they're high profile and it's because they're wealthy. It creates a story. Michael McIntyre, the comedian, was robbed at knife point for his Rolex. So it does happen. It does highlight a big problem in this country, which has been ongoing for a couple of years now. Is these violent attacks and thefts of wealthy individuals? Who would want? Firstly, did you not see Ovechkin flatten Smechnikov in the playoffs? 19-year-old comes up against 32-year-old Hall of Famer and Stanley Cup winner. Brave lad that he was, Smechnikov got annihilated. And he's a Russian with limited teeth and a pedigree of being a physical lump. Yeah. A Russian with links to Putin. You're not going to rob him. Kalaznic was the other player. Yes. I prefer Bellator because there's a lot of free-to-air coverage of Bellator on Channel 5 for some of their minor tournaments. UFC, just look how badly that is stage managed. McGregor, for example, out of control. Other UFC fighters have got checkered histories as well. On the media side of things, with the ice hockey, but they're shoving down women's cricket. Look, ice hockey, it's starting to grow now. It's starting to get more mainstream coverage, but it's not getting enough. Sky Sports and BBC did have the rights of the old Super League, so we're going back nearly 20 years. And now the Elite League has this TV deal with Premier Free Sports. It's getting the viewership. But it is a shame that a lot of the main outside of Premier Free Sports network, that the mainstream media doesn't really care, and I think that's wrong. I do think it's wrong. The women's cricket, we are good at it. I'm not going to lie. The women are actually quite good at the game, and they have won the World Cup, and they have been a very good side for a very, very long time. But yes, I do think they're trying to over promote women's sport. I understand why. There's a big health issue with women not being as fit and healthy as they could be, and young girls, and especially when they leave school, they stop exercising. They stop taking part in these social activities that casual football locally here, and they've given up. And yes, they're not as healthy as they were 5-10 years ago. I think they are overdoing it a little bit, but it's the mainstream media in this country is becoming more and more left wing every day, and more biased. Especially the BBC, that should be a neutral broadcaster. They are overdoing it, and I can understand the frustrations from a lot of sports fans. Most sports fans are men, and it's a difficult one. The women's cricket team though are actually quite good, and that's another reason why there's a big interest, is because they are successful. But yeah, I mean, look, they are really driving the equality agenda, because the broadcasters have had such negative press themselves about sexual harassment, bullying, unfair pay gap, Jimmy Savile. We are going, and they are on the back foot, and they are trying to basically, seem to be more, open and positive when it comes to minorities and women. I think they're doing it too much, which is actually damaging the call for equality. I think they're overdoing it now, but it is what it is. I prefer to see women promoted on merit rather than their gender. And unfortunately, we're in a world now where the feminist movement, while I accept it's there, and it's an important movement to have, they're overdoing it with the women's sport. Because while the viewership figures are going up and the respect that they are showing is going up, they still face the cave trolls, and some of those cave trolls online are women, ironically. But look, it is what it is. I'm not going to knock them for doing what they do, but the Women's Super League is going to be part of the next football package for Sky, BT, and Amazon, and whoever takes up that gap in the broadcast rights for the next coming TV deals. That's going to be interesting. Rugby World Cup. I think I'm going to have to look at that with a week to go, a week before the tournament starts, because while we've had all the warm up games, there's been some big decisions made by some of the coaches. And I think it's the most open World Cup we've had, I would say, since 2003, maybe 2007. I think it's a very open one. I think there's going to be a lot of upsets. There's definitely going to be a more open, more expansive. I can see big teams slipping up to smaller teams, and I can see some teams really pushing on. And I think other teams may have slipped back, but I don't know who's going to win. I think it's too open a call. I think Ireland are now the number one team in the world. Wales have had the number one spot. New Zealand have had the number one spot. All in the space of 2 weeks. The number one team in the world. This is why world rankings, I think, are flawed. England have had the number one spot. I mean, I think 4 or 5 teams have rotated that number one spot within the space of 2 weeks, and sometimes within the space of a couple of hours. New Zealand are looking human. They have shown a few frailties, time game notwithstanding. That heavy defeat to Australia, that record defeat to Australia, hurt. But they've been exposed by the Springboks and the Pumas as well in the Rugby Championship. Ireland have shown them up twice in 2 years. So I think, I think there is a more open World Cup. I think the Kiwis, the All Blacks, have peaked. I think they peaked just after the last World Cup. I think they've gone through that dominant phase now. I don't think they're going to be the top. Oh, look, any team is beatable. There's only so long you can win before teams figure you out. And the fact that the All Blacks have lost twice to Ireland, and have been driven all the way by England and the Lions as well in a couple of tests in the last few years, I think that group of players has peaked as a group. I think going forward, the Super Rugby issues financially, and this is where the domestic game is starting, I think, to have an effect on the All Blacks because of the concerns about the money side of things. Um, that's having an effect uh, on players having to look to Europe to go, I want to continue my career. I can get paid 2-3 times as much in Europe than I can domestically. Um, and they could lose some of their best internationals to the European leagues because of money. And because of their current selection rules, that's going to pose Steve Hansen and his successors and the New Zealand Rugby Football Union a big headache. Do they change their selection rules so the best New Zealand players can play, or do they stick with you have to be based in New Zealand to play for the All Blacks? It's going to be an interesting one. Plus, they also have to look at, is it good PR for them to continue to pillage alongside Australia and some of the Northern Hemisphere nations the best Polynesian South Sea Islander players as well, because that's not good PR. And I think fans are starting to go, we've had enough. The school zone thing, yes. I think, I think the school zone thing, I think it's been a positive. I think it definitely I've has brought new fans in and new families in, and yeah, I've seen a lot of new faces the last couple of years. I think it's a positive community outreach. I think that's something that sport could do more in certain aspects. But yeah, we'll see how successful, how many of these kids decide as they're older to continue to watch or play the sport. I think that's a good one. The Peterborough Phantoms playing the Milton Keynes Thunder. I don't get why that was fixtured in as a pre-season friendly. They're in two different leagues. But it's pre-season. You want to get your players match fit. You want to get your combinations sorted out. And if you beat a team 16-0, you beat a team 16-0. You can only play what's in front of you. That's the problem, I think, that is getting it fixtured. It's just how they've worked out geographically. They're very, very close together. There's some there are some Milton Keynes Lightning players on two-way contracts with the Thunder. I don't think it helps either side, really. It just says that Peterborough are a league above and they have the more talented players, basically. So I think what purpose does it serve? You want to get your players match fit. I think that's the important thing, and you want to get your combinations down and get your team chemistry going. Apart from that, you see it every pre-season in a multitude of sports. You're not going to play 110%, are you? You're going to go out there and just want to get through, get yourself ready for the regular season when the real battle begins. But anyway, as I said, the All Blacks are beatable. The Irish have proved that twice. The Lions proved it not that long ago as well. Australia having a record win against them, it does show that they are human. And I think they have peaked as a side. I think they might still win the World Cup. It's going to be harder for them. And they've only won one World Cup out of their three in the Northern Hemisphere. They've only won one away from home. So, again, and in that semi-final against Africa, they could have lost that 4 years ago. So they are, I think, vulnerable. And I think some other teams really show up in the World Cup, and the Argentinians always show up. The South Africans always, raise their game for the most part in the World Cup. So they're not as unbeatable as they think. Do I see the New Zealand cricket team winning the World Cup? Yes. I can see them also being the top Test team in the world within the next couple of years as well. Uh, I do see that happening. For a country their size to produce as many high quality teams from cricket, rugby union, rugby league that they do, and the amount of players they produce for a population, I think about 4 to 5 million, that's not bad going. They are a sports mad country and they put a lot of emphasis on sport. Um, be it amateur or professional, they really do fund their sport really well to a point where it's sort of part of their culture. They're a very sporty culture. How many times have you seen an obese Kiwi? They really are a very active society and they're a very healthy society. And and it pays off on the sports field. Um, what else have we got? The Manchester WWE. Not what it was 15, 20 years ago, but I'm old enough to remember the Attitude Era. I'm actually old enough to remember the pre-Attitude Era. Um, so I think WWE has had its day. I think professional wrestling has had its day. I used to watch TNA. I used to watch WCW. I used to watch WWE when it was WWF. That's how old I am. But I haven't watched professional wrestling properly. I've watched a little bit here or there, but I haven't watched it properly in years. I think for me, it's lost um, its enjoyment for me. I think there's been too many scandals in the industry, especially in WWE, but other promotions as well, with steroid abuse, early death, substance misuse, welfare of the wrestlers. CM Punk has highlighted that, yeah, the welfare is not always there. And with the deaths of Eddie Guerrero and how he died, and the death of Chris Benoit and his death of his family, does say there's a massive, massive issue with looking after them. It makes them a lot of money. The wrestlers make the promotions a lot of money, but at the same time, if you don't look after them, bad things happen. Um, I think Swindon in the first game, from what I've heard, they weren't very, very good. The second game, they obviously responded to a defeat at home with a win away, and that's something. But they were tuned on in the first 20 minutes. The last 40 was a very even game. It was only a 2-1 game over the second and third periods. It was the first 20 minutes that won them the game. They're not always going to have the first 20 minutes of a game that easy, but it is pre-season. And I will say this about the Manchester Storm: it's pre-season. I don't put too much. I don't put too much stock in pre-season. The results are important, but at the same time, it's the performance that's more important. And I was very disappointed with how the Bees played for 20 minutes, and the damage was done. And then to concede 2 more goals, one of which was avoidable, is frustrating. As a lifelong fan, I've seen them play worse occasionally, but not for a couple of years now. But that was a pretty diabolical attempt at play. I know there's a lot of new faces in there, and it's only the second preseason game out of 4. If the team don't respond against the Raiders at home on Saturday, I will be pretty pissed off. It is a plain simple way to look at it. We do have a professional. We have a professional netball and basketball league, but they're not promoted on the same level as other leagues. They just don't get the promotion they should. And yes, the World Cup, the Netball World Cup in Liverpool was well, I didn't watch any of it, and it's not a sport like those netball and basketball aren't sports that I enjoy watching. I will watch basketball more likely than I'll watch netball, obviously. But yes, the viewership figures, the attendance figures, the amount of fans in general, the fan parks being overflowing, families watching, men actually go happily sitting with their family members and watching netball when they could be watching cricket, they could be watching football, rugby, whatever sport may be, if they had the opportunity, and them actually happily happily, support that is a good sign. again, they had the Netball World Cup. They still have shared rights. If they're showing a World Cup tournament on free to air, why is the Cricket World Cup not on free to air? That's the debate I'll be having. If they're showing a more minority sport because it has less participation, because it is a women's only sport, really. If they're happy to show that on free to air, why can't we have the Cricket World Cup and the domestic Test matches and domestic county championship and T20 and one days on free to air? That's the debate I would have. Why can we have an international netball tournament on free to air, but not the Ashes? And on that point, Sky loses its leg to stand on. The ECB really looks stupid then. If the netball sporting authorities in the UK can go, we'll put the World Cup on free to air TV. Well, we'll keep the netball regular season on Sky, and they have every right to do so because that's the domestic club games is where the money's at in every sport. If they're willing to put the World Cup on free to air TV, the ECB have got to look at themselves and gone, we have really screwed up. And the ECB have been screwing up since 2005. And unfortunately, I think they're going to continue to screw up for another 14, 15 years. I do not see an end in sight for the ECB not screwing up. I'm not angry that domestic club games are on subscription TV. What I am angry about is there's hardly any domestic club games on a variety of sports on free to air TV, and I think shared rights is not working. Oh yeah, the BBC. Look, people are complaining about the TV license. A lot of people are saying it should be scrapped and it should become a commercial station like the others. And yeah, Sky Sports and what was the Murdoch Empire. I'm not a fan of it. There's not a single Murdoch publication in my household. We don't even buy the Times anymore. And my granddad used to buy the Times a lot. He stopped buying the Times, and that's a Murdoch publication. It's the posh version of the Sun. We do watch Sky News, but Sky News is now owned by Comcast along with the whole Sky network. So not a single Murdoch owned media outlet is consumed in my family or household. He's a grubby individual. His companies are grubby companies. He doesn't even control Sky 20th Century Fox anymore. I don't think. He's had to sell part of that off out of his media empire. So while I do have a lot of films about 20th Century Fox, for the most part, apart from cinema, which I think they've got right with 20th Century Fox, he didn't found 20th Century Fox. He bought it. But yes, no, there is not a single Murdoch TV channel or print publication in this household. Unfortunately, when it comes to the NRL, Murdoch does have a say in that because of Fox in Australia, which is their version of Sky, having the rights. But the Nine Network has shared rights, so every game is on free-to-air TV in Australia, and every game is on subscription TV in Australia. And guess what? People watch. Participation is, it's big sport. It's the same with AFL to a point. The concern I have is I think the BBC has faced a lot of criticism for the amount it pays its presenters, some of the scandals it's faced with Jimmy Savile and others, and it's seemed to be more biased now than what it was 10 years. They've gone very PC. It's not what it should be as a network, and I think it won't be long before it has to go commercial, free to air, to survive. But no, ITV do a very good bit of coverage. Yes, there's too many adverts, but at the same time, ITV do a good job with the rugby, and they have done for 20 years. I'm not knocking ITV for their rugby union coverage. They've done very, very well for a very long time. And they get it right. The BBC hates the Conservative Party because the Conservative Party, believes in free enterprise, and the BBC isn't free enterprise because it's technically funded by the TV license, which is technically a tax, which is governed by the government because it's a corporation, not a company. It's complicated. I'm not going to go into the reasons why. It is what it is and why it's ad free, but the TV license pays, but not enough people are paying it, and they're refusing to do so. A lot of people are not happy with the BBC. Um, paying some of its top talent lots of money while slashing costs. They got rid of BBC Three. That did not go down well. Um, and the free TV, the subsidised TV licenses for the elderly, who are not a very popular age group right now with a lot of people my age. They're not very happy with it. They've lost a lot of sports rights. They're continuing to bleed sporting rights to other channels, be it free to wear, commercial, or subscription commercial channels. And they have definitely got their got their priorities too short sighted. They're not looking for the long game, and I don't know how long the BBC can survive in its current form. But I don't want to talk about broadcasters unless it's talking about actual broadcast rights of sports. The BBC is an issue for the other channel to discuss when I can be bothered to actually post a video to the other channel for the first time in like 6 months. My friend's just got Sky Q, and it's not much different to normal Sky. Really, just have a remote you can talk to, and more easy to lose and break. But that's it, really. Hello, Min Min from Calgary. I'm assuming you're a Calgary Roughnecks or Calgary Stampede or Calgary Flames fan. It'll be interesting to know who you support. But no, I think they have definitely, the BBC have definitely really driven the women's sport agenda. Have they overdone it? I think it does more damage to the equality argument than help, especially when the female athletes aren't necessarily that good. We've had some great female athletes. Flames, excellent. Now we can talk some NHL. The NHL is interesting. I've been thinking about a couple of videos I could do on the NHL, and the Calgary Flames are an interesting team. When I was a young kid, and we're talking when I was born and the first couple of years I was alive, they were one of the top teams in the NHL. What happened in the playoffs this year is a real disappointment. I think they really dominated the Western Conference, and then they stopped playing, much like the Tampa Bay Lightning. They put too much energy into the regular season. I think where the Flames fall down is playoff consistency. The issues with the Saddle Dome as well are a big concern for the Calgary Flames. I believe that the plans are starting to come to fruition with building a new arena that is more modern. But I think the Calgary Flames are an interesting it's going to be interesting to see where the Flames go this season. I think to have only one Stanley Cup to that organisation's name is a travesty. I think they possibly should have had more in the 80s and 90s, but again, it's that consistency where they get into the playoffs, not get into the playoffs, and when they're in the playoffs, how far do they go? So we'll see how the Flames do. I think they're definitely going to be a playoff team. The Western Conference, especially the Pacific Division. I don't understand the Pacific Division, how weak it's become, yes, they're adding Seattle to that division when they join the league, but there's only 3 out of the 8 teams that I can see being playoff teams this year. Only one of the Californian teams as well, and that tells you something. San Jose is I think the only 3 Californian powerhouses that are actually going to make the playoffs again. Anaheim and LA have fallen apart really, partly because they got old, but partly they haven't got the balance of their teams right. I think San Jose maybe 1 or 2 more seasons, and then they could be in rebuild mode. I think Carlson, his fitness is going to be a concern. Joe Thornton, how long can he keep going? They've lost Pavelski. Marlowe hasn't been signed. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think Calgary are in a very weak division. And if Calgary, let's say, were in the Central Division, I don't think they get out of that. I think that's going to be more of a battle than the Pacific. But it is what it is. They're in the Pacific. I think the Battle of Alberta has lost a bit of meaning again because Edmonton have got, well, shit again. It's plain and simple. But we'll see what happens. How do the Rangers do this season? Trouba's an interesting addition. I think I've got my friend Sam is a massive Rangers fan and he has been for years. But it's about keeping Lundqvist fit in net because I don't think Georgiev is as good. I think there's a reason why he's the backup and hasn't taken the number one job in net. And Trouba, have they paid too much for his contract? Because Pionk didn't have the best season, but none of the Rangers had the best season last year. There's a reason why they've missed the playoffs for a couple of years. The team is not doing as well as it was 4 or 5 years ago. I think while they've made some good, interesting moves and they've got some good young players coming through, I think a lot depends on Lundqvist. And if Lundqvist declines quicker than anticipated because he is getting on, he hasn't got many years left. This may be his last season. It could be his second last season. He could do 3 or 4 more seasons. But if Lundqvist gets hurt or loses some form, they are in trouble. And while they've made some interesting moves, and when I say interesting, you know, it's a wait and see kind of thing. Have they overpaid Trouba? And are they going to regret some of the trades, or are those trades going to pay off? It's a big question mark. They've got some good prospects coming through. Some of them are from the European leagues. Are they going to adapt well enough to the North American system and style of play? It's going to be interesting. But yeah, before the first pucks even dropped for the season, there are 31 teams who have players who believe they can win, unless it's Ottawa, unless it's the Senators, because they are a fire. But there's always, I would say, at least 20 teams that are playoff contenders from the first day of the season. The other 10, 11, they could have that run and they could do something. But I think it's going to be interesting. The NHL, Free Sports, they are going to show. They are going to show more games on Free Sports. They were so popular when they were on. I mean, they had some playoff games. They have had a few live games on the NHL. But bearing in mind, we're 5 to 8 hours ahead of the US and Canada, depending on time zone. So some of those games are late at night. They're not going to get the viewership. But it is nice when they do the full match replays as well. And Free Sports and Premier Sports are the fastest growing sports network in the country, and they've hit the nail on the head. We'll give out a free channel, and it's worked. And looking at how BT are hemorrhaging money, and Sky are having to constantly raise the price of their subscription. Yeah, it's a no-brainer. Of the fact that free-to-air TV works. What is it? Oh, Calgary have got is a decent sports city. I will admit, having only one team in Major League Rugby is a problem for the Canadian setup because Canada, at the international level of rugby union, has slipped back, and that's a problem. It would be nice to see a team in Vancouver in the Major League Rugby or a team in Calgary, yes. And because they do play in the spring and summer, the weather is doesn't affect the sport as much, although they did have a lot of snow this season in Major League Rugby. They had a few snowstorms and games delayed or affected by the weather, but they played on. But no, the rugby in Canada has got a strong connection. But yeah, they do need to look at why they've struggled in recent years, especially against the US and Uruguay, where they have been overtaken, in my view, and they're not as strong as they were. And what's gone wrong? Because over the years, Canada has produced some really great players and had some really good teams, but for the level they play at. But it is a shame. But it is what it is. England same score for the five Ash, the fifth Ashes test. Yes, the problem is Ben Stokes is an injury concern, and apart from one good innings in the third test, he's not consistent enough. And the fact he's part of that leadership group in the dressing room as vice captain, I'm scratching my head considering all the issues he's had with his legal ramifications and some of his off-field indiscretions over the years. He might have cleaned up his act publicly. He's still a thug. He's still a homophobe. He's still a racist. He still just mocks the disabled, and I don't like Ben Stokes. Uh, so, and I think Sam Curran is an adequate all-round replacement. We've lost the series. Give some of the young players a chance. Why stick with a losing team? They're a losing team for a reason. They're not winning this Test series. You know, they are a losing team for a reason. Give some of the youth a chance. See what they can do. If they can draw the series, I know Australia have retained the series by virtue of winning the last series, but put some of the younger players in. Let them express themselves. Give them a shot. Don't understand that selection. Oh, we're not going to change a losing team. Well done, ECB. Well done, Joe Root. This is why Joe Root shouldn't be captain. This is why Trevor Bayliss shouldn't be coach. They've just rewarded failure by saying we're not going to change any of the players that have just lost us the Ashes. We're not going to go, right, you're not good enough. We're going to reward failure by keeping you in the team for playing crap all summer. Well done. Oh, look. Ben Stokes is an arsehole. He's an overpaid arsehole at that. I couldn't care less what happens to him. Plus, he's not even English. He's actually from New Zealand. So he's one of those residency Brits. So yeah, he wasn't good enough to get in the New Zealand system as a kid. So he comes over here, goes to school in Cumbria, and gets selected for England. He's an arsehole. I have no time for people like that. He's an arrogant bastard. Do I like World Rally Championship? I actually prefer Scandinavian domestic national championships because they're more fun because you can just turn up in any car you want, put an engine in it and a roll cage, and go buy a second-hand car and take it for a spin in the woods. I'm a big fan of the Swedish and Finnish domestic championships and random one-off rallies that they have because you can just rock up in a car, roll cage in it, and some rally modifications like a skid pan and a few other bits and pieces. Take the airbags out, put a racing steering wheel in, and put bucket seats, and go for a drive in the woods. And if you break your car, oh well, it only cost me €500. I'll buy another one. British touring cars, yeah, pretty. I'm pretty. I like the British touring cars. I've missed the last couple of rounds, partly partly because I haven't been in the house or I've been busy, but I try and watch as many rounds as possible. There are a few tracks that I'm not a big fan of, and this weekend is Rockingham, and that's my least favourite track. I don't like ovals that have infields. Well, I love NASCAR, and I love the DTM, and there is a track in the DTM that's an old oval. I think Rockingham is not the best track. It's a shocking track, and always has been. It doesn't get good crowds. It gets high speeds though, and some of the accidents are entertaining and scary because that concrete wall. They need to make some changes to the safety of that track, but it is what it is. What other ones have we got? Thoughts on Flames after E2 Tuola. I don't know enough about the player. I don't follow the NHL off season religiously, but at the moment with the salary cap being a couple of $1 million lower than what was anticipated this time last year, that has put 5 teams are still over the cap. Other teams are struggling to sign their RFAs, and the RFA market is going to be a big discussion point going forward into the collective bargaining agreement. There's an announcement due on the 15th, it looks very likely the NHLPA is also not going to opt out. They're going to stay into the CBA. They're going to wait until Seattle has completed its first season before they decide to extend or come up with a new one. All the language coming out from both parties is more in good faith than in previous collective bargaining agreements. They're not going to do what they did in 1998 and just stick a sticking plaster over for 6 years. They're not going to do what they did in 2013 and allow the previous sticking plaster, which was what came out of the 2006 2007 kind of 2005 2006 season. I think they're going in with more good faith. The NHLPA is a bigger union now than what it was 2013 and in 2005 because more teams have joined the league and another team is joining the league. And so I think we're going to avoid a lockout. I think while there are issues to be raised, escrow being one, the Olympics being another, bridge contracts and RFA status and UFA, and I think team owners are like, we want to get our players signed. We want to have the best team we can put out. We want to win and make money. And you can't make money if you don't have the best talent available because talent sells. Having players like Patrick Laine and Kyle Connor and Matt Tkachuk not signed is a problem because these are your household, these are the faces of your franchise going forward for the next 10 years. If you can't get them signed and they sit out the season, that affects your chances of winning the Stanley Cup. Mitch Marner. Another one. Nylander last year has set a trend, and it's not a good trend. I think some of these players will eventually go, we just want to play and make some money because they're not making money at the moment. You don't get signed, you're not making cash, and they're going to want money. Greed does talk. Money talks, and eventually I think they're going to pack in. Dundee fans, from what I haven't read anything into it, but there were several players injured this weekend in various games up and down, not only the Elite League and the National League, but in Europe as well. There was a Hornets player, that's the Bracknell second team, who was carted off on a stretcher in a very serious condition against Streatham. And yeah, there were some not necessarily tasteful scenes up in Dundee, but I don't know enough about the incident. So therefore it'd be wrong of me to comment. But we get this a lot in football and we get this a lot in other sports like rugby league and rugby union. We've had it in league especially. So on that point, distasteful sports fans, you find them in every sport. There was some racial slurs aimed at Jofra Archer by Australian and England fans at Old Trafford last week that have made media attention on social media and mainstream. And we're seeing racism in cricket. Who would have thought, the gentle game of cricket, that there's been racial elements in that crowd from both home and away fans towards a player who's one of the best young talented players in the world right now? That's pretty low and not a good look. That is bad. Football's having a big problem with racist, homophobic elements as well. And cheering a player getting hurt, getting severely injured in a brutal contact sport like ice hockey is pretty low on the list of things to do. But this is where alcohol and professional sports are not a good mix, and sports fans aren't a good mix. Well, I will be watching the GB Lions. The matches are on free-to-air TV. They're on the BBC. All three tests are being shown, which is really good news. If they weren't to show that, that would really be a mess, considering they made a big song and dance about showing all the England games at the World Cup. So I don't think they're going to be comfortable wins. I really don't. I honestly believe they're going to be tough games. There's a reason why PNG and Tonga have earned the right to play a touring Lions side. Look at their performances in the World Cup 2 years ago. That tells you everything you need to know. And the Tongans will put out Tamalolo and Fafita in their forward pack, and that is two of the most powerful ball runners of forwards you're going to see. They're going to hit it up. PNG, they've got some pretty good players as well, actually, and they play a physical brand of league that sometimes borderline on is that attempted murder kind of tackling. They are going to be physical. They're not going to back down. Um, so because the GB players play in two different countries, be it Australia in the NRL and in an England Super League, that's that you got to try and bring two technically sets of players together to gel them into a national side. And the NRL and Super League are two different styles of rugby league, whereas the Kiwis, the Tongans, and Papua New Guinea, most of their players, if not all of their players, play in Australia and New Zealand. So for them, it doesn't matter. They know the conditions. They know. Uh, 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 it doesn't matter that some of the Papua New Guinea players play in reserve grade. They still know those conditions. Um, they're very proud to wear the Kumals jersey, and it is their national sport. So they are fanatical on the pitch. On the Welsh Rugby Union fans, I have a very, very negative impression of them. For the most part, they they are a toxic bunch. There's a minority of them that ruin it for the majority. I'm not a big fan of a pretty toxic minority that have unfortunately made my life on this channel hell at times. I've had a lot of abuse aimed at me from them, a lot of abuse, and to be honest, I hope they do really bad at the World Cup. Not the players' fault that the team play the way they do. It's Warren Gatlin's style to be pragmatic, absolutely. But even in victory, you can be critical of a team in victory. They do struggle to put an 80-minute performance together, and some of their defeats in the recent weeks, have dented uh, um, have dented their have dented their how do I put it? Not credibility, but I think you just go away. Just go away with another person. Have dented their uh, I wouldn't say dented their chances, but I think possibly the momentum that they were bringing off that 17 game win streak that they had going into the summer, August, and September internationals. They'd done this win streak. They got to the number one spot for a week in the world, and their fans can't take criticism when they win, and they're very sore losers as well. The England Wales game the other week in Cardiff, Wales were hammered at Twickenham. Hammered. They were playing Cardiff, and there were some instances in that game that created a rule change for one, and had that happened to Wales, they would be screaming that if England got away with it, there's favouritism. There's a reason why the club game in Wales is struggling. Not all these fans that pack out the Principality Stadium every time Wales play and put on those daffodil uniforms and bring the inflatable sheep. They don't support their local club. They don't support their local province. And there is a reason why the Welsh domestic game is going down the toilet financially. I call them plastic fans. They only show up when Wales are playing in the Six Nations or Autumn Internationals. They don't show up for the club games week in, week out. It's not that expensive to go and watch a Welsh Pro 14 side play. It's not. And they're not showing up, and they're not supporting their local club. Yet they want to be toxic and vile on the internet. They even abuse their own players on Twitter. There's a reason why Reece Priestland has turned his back on the national side. And while he's not the best fly half in the world, he's a damn sight better than most of these Welsh fans ever were at school. He's played at the top level. He's played injured for a large portion of his career. And they were, well, pretty vile to him after 2011 onwards. And he basically said, I've had enough of this. Alex Cuthbert, one of the best wingers they've ever produced. He's not playing for the national side now. Turns back on the national side because of the abuse he was receiving online for a couple of mistakes he made in one game. No, the Welsh fans are toxic. But if you want to look at football fans, I think English football fans are toxic as well. I think you could say Australian sports fans in general are, especially rugby league fans. There's a fair bit of racism in the rugby league as well in Australia, and they're pretty. They let their side down, and AFL fans, they let their side down a fair bit. You could say some European football fans as well, pretty shitty. American sports fans are just arrogant in your face. You're going to get it in every fan base. But what I find really hypocritical about the Welsh is they can't accept criticism in victory or defeat, and they've got a chip on their shoulder. It's a minority of them. It's a small minority, but it's enough for me to go, I hope your team loses. Not because I wish ill will on the players. Some of those players have had some really hideous abuse from their own fans on social media. These same fans who dress up like sheep and leeks and daffodils and look like utter idiots, and then attack on a train the opposition coach. I don't like Eddie Jones, but Jesus Christ, absolute clueless, classless. And I'm not a fan of a lot of England fans either, of a variety of sports. I'm really not. But the fact that other Welsh fans have come up and said we don't like a minority of our fan base, I could say that about almost every fan base I've come across, but I've never had it so publicly aimed at. I have a different opinion, and they can't accept it. Sorry. I still think their team can be one-dimensional, and but then Scottish football fans, especially Celtic and Rangers fans, are the lowest common denominator. I think they're the worst out of the lot. The sectarian nature of Scottish football is in 2019. The fact that Celtic and Rangers are having stand closures, they're having to have parts of their stadium closed for European games and club games, tells you all you need to know. Hearts and Hibs fans, this is what I mean. They're depending on the sport, some fan bases are. I mean, Spanish fans are, when it comes to football, are exceptionally racist. Dutch fans are pretty bad as well. Italian fans, I mean, what the Curva Nord of the Inter Ultras, and they are just thugs. Okay, they are racist thugs who have a fascist element. Saying that the monkey chants aimed at Romelu Lukaku weren't racist from the Cagliari fans, who are a club known to have a racist right-wing fan base as well, but a sign of endearment. What? It was a respect for him. By racially abusing him, that's cool. But the Curva Nord, they are known to be fascist-leaning right-wing thugs. So yeah, Italian football fans are pretty disgusting. Russian fans in general, because they're normally thugs. From what I've seen of sports fans, the worst sports are football and rugby league. Cricket does have its moments, but I never thought I would hear racism and cricket in the same sentence in 2019. But it's a thing. And I think, unfortunately, there seems to be an upsurge in unsightly and unseemly behaviour. It's seen as more acceptable. It's 2019. It's not 1919, but it seems we've gone backwards, and it's not good. I never thought I would read on social media and in the newspapers and watch on the TV, on the news, sports news, that Jofra Archer was being racially abused, not only by Australian fans, but by the England fans as well at Old Trafford. And other players were having homophobic slurs aimed at them by a group of 6 to 10 rather large drunk lads on the final day, and on the first day, a large group of Australian lads. I'm sorry that for me has no place in any sport, and it seems that the stewards were very slow acting in removing the first group from Australia, and they didn't even bother with the English lads. That tells you all you need to know about the lack of willpower within sport to tackle some of these things. Um, Moving on from my dislike of a lot of fan bases, and I'm not a big fan of Chelsea fans in general, although I have a subscriber to this channel, his own channel, who's a Chelsea fan. I've got some friends who are Chelsea fans. I'm not a fan of Millwall fans. I'm not a fan of Man United fans, City fans. There's some fan bases in football that I dislike passionately because of a minority of morons that allegedly support those clubs. But we're moving on. I've seen some. I've seen footage of some NHL fans not being best behaved. Some have been in Canada. A lot have been in the US. NFL fans, they have a bad rep. Baseball fans have a terrible rep. Basketball, not so much, but there are certain sports in North America that have a bad reputation for their fans being less than acceptable in their behavior. And again, it's mostly to do with alcohol, and the Americans can't handle their liquor. The Canadians can, but the Americans can't. And yeah, it's alcohol and sports fans is just not a good mix. And yet, some sports leagues have banned alcohol sales at games, and they're reconsidering dropping those bans. The SP, the Scottish Professional Football League, the SPFL, and the SFA are considering dropping their alcohol ban in stadiums. They can't even control the sectarianism in stadiums and the violence in stadiums. They want to put alcohol into the mix. Okay, Scottish football, how out of touch have you not read the room? Yeah, there's always pitch invaders for a variety of reasons. We saw it at the Football World Cup. Do I find Liverpool fans very whiny? Look, my dad was a Liverpool fan. My granddad was a Liverpool fan. I've got some good mates that are Liverpool fans. But as a fan base, yeah, they whine on about Hillsborough, and it's a sad tragedy that it is. But let's not forget Hazel and what they did at Hazel against the Juventus. Actual fans, not hooligans. They killed 30-odd people. Let's not forget the Valley Parade fire at Bradford City, where 56 people died. Yet, you know, they whine and go on about Hillsborough. I understand why the Hillsborough thing is a big thing. It is a turning point. It is a moment in this country's sporting psyche that is a turning point. But Valley Parade should have been a turning point. You know, that should have been a turning point when a whole football stand burnt down and 56 people burnt to death. That should have been the watershed moment. It shouldn't have come to Hillsborough, but it did. And what is even more gutting is that the Nottingham Forest swapped ends with Liverpool. And it could so easily be Nottingham Forest fans that were crushed to death that day, but it wasn't. The clubs agreed to swap the fan zones, basically, which club got which end of the stadium. And the fact that the FA knew that Hillsborough had failed its safety certificate 3 years in a row. Yes, the FA has blood on their hands. No, the media was wrong. It was called Murdoch, and this is one of the reasons why Rupert Murdoch is not read in my family. This is why he's after Hillsborough. My granddad stopped buying the Times. My dad, obviously, my granddad's son-in-law, was a Liverpool fan and witnessed Hazel and witnessed Hillsborough. And I will say this: after that moment, Murdoch my dad never got Sky Sports. ever, 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 ever. Um, he refused to give Murdoch any money. The fact that the Hillsborough inquest is still now going to David Duckenbill's trial, my dad's now dead. My dad was lifelong. My dad was a non-league football player before he joined the army. And while my dad was a Liverpool fan, he wasn't whiny at all. He wasn't whiny at all. What pissed my dad off more was the fact that Blackburn has won a Premier League and Liverpool hasn't. That's what pissed my dad off more in his lifetime. But I do think there was a minority of, but Liverpool has got a toxic fan base. I've been to Anfield. I've seen how vile they can be towards their own players, and the abuse that their own players get from their fans. I've seen it. I've seen it, and I'm not a big fan of Liverpool fan base. It's a minority of them, but the abuse they give their own players, they burgle their players' houses. Doesn't matter if you play for Everton or Liverpool, you're getting burgled as a player. You're going to have someone break into your house at some point and nick your stuff. I think it's a minority of fans, but yes, we can go on about and how it pisses off other fan bases, and it does. The turning point and the watershed, should have been the Valley Parade fire in the mid-80s, not Hillsborough. It should have been Hazel, not Hillsborough. Norwich City fans, I don't really have a problem with Norwich City fans, to be honest. I've never had calls to go, you are a vile fan base. I've never had calls to say you have a minority of fans that are racist, homophobe, or thuggish. They are probably there, but they've never really made the press for crowd trouble. They've never really made the press for being vile towards their own players. So I don't know what else to really say to that. I mean, I've seen Norwich City play, and as a couple of matches, never had any cause to have trouble with them. I think they're one of the better fan bases in the country. I know I've seen Ipswich Town play, and actually, to be fair, their fans were pretty good as well. Down away at Portsmouth fans were much worse. When I went to a Portsmouth Ipswich game with my granddad years ago, and I went to a couple of Reading Ipswich games as well back in the old pre-Premier League days for Reading. And I will admit this: I felt the Ipswich fans were good voice and good laugh, and took both defeats really, really well. If I'm being honest, the games I've seen Ipswich Town play, they've lost, and they've lost by the same scoreline in both. But I've never come across any negativity from either fan base. I know Ipswich and Norwich don't like each other, but I've never come across, when I've seen those teams play, not against each other, but when I've seen Ipswich play or I've seen Norwich play in my footballing travels, I've never really seen any reason to hate their fans, or a minority of them. They seem to come across as two of the better fan bases in this country. You don't see a lot of negative press about them. You don't see a lot of, bad antics. I think there are some clubs that seem to have a misbehavior element, a bad element to their fan base that just clings to them like a badly fitting suit. But it is what it is. But certain fan bases have a tag they can't get rid of, like Man United and Chelsea having that racism tag. Liverpool having the tag that they've got the victim complex. Rangers and Celtic, the sectarian tag, and the fact that they can't seem to shed that because regularly, repetitively, their fans keep misbehaving. Millwall, having a tag of their a nasty fan base that regularly causes trouble. Some clubs do find it difficult to shed themselves of a negative connotation. Yes, I am listening. I get you. Um, ask a question rather than go, "Hey man, question would be nice," rather than just demanding that I respond to you. That's how it works on this live stream. You ask a question, I respond. Do I see Tonga win the Rugby League World Cup? Possible. It is possible. I do think that they have the players. It's all about getting that kind of consistency of a high level together. They've massively improved from where they were, but it's getting those players willing to play for Tonga rather than New Zealand and Australia, and to a certain extent England as well. It's getting their best players to want to play for the Tongan national side rather than Australia and then uh, New Zealand. And in the World Cup 2 years ago, they decided, for Fita and Tamalolo especially, yeah, we want to play for Tonga, and they did really well because of it. Uh, I'm glad you got through uh, the the uh, the hurricane. I mean, I think I'm glad that you're okay. I've got friends all up and down. I've got a few friends up and down the east coast, and you know it. I've got a friend in Miami, so as far as I'm aware, he's done okay. I've got a friend in Texas who obviously got through that big hurricane a couple of years ago, and my family have got friends in the US as well. So yeah, it is worrying, but I'm glad you're through it. I'm glad you've come out of it all in one piece. Yeah, the damage we've seen on the news, it's massive. The Bahamas is basically been not wiped out, but flattened in a way. And while the storm did weaken as it went towards the US, it's affected Canada. It's gone as far as Newfoundland and New Brunswick, and that that tells you how big this storm was. It's the second strongest hurricane of all time. That's that's something that has a massive impact, and I'm glad you're okay. Is the simple answer, and it didn't affect the U.S. Open finals as much as I thought it would with the wind conditions and the the possibility of wind or rain delays. It didn't affect the two US Open finals, but it did have uh, the um, the possibility of doing that. But it's it it's just it's something that nature does some crazy stuff. Do I think South Africa can win the Rugby World Cup? Yeah, I do think they can. I think when it comes to these big tournaments, as they proved 4 years ago, in a team that was misfiring, they got to the semi-finals and they finished third overall. Um, that that for me, they're big tournament players. They turn, even if in the rugby championship they're not quite firing on all cylinders, and if they're not quite getting the autumn internationals right when it comes to the World Cup, they turn it on, and they've got some really good players, and they've become, I think, a bit more flexible in their tactics. I think they're just more than just a power game now, and trying to bully you off the field. I think they've got a bit more skill about them, and yeah, they've got some good players. They're a bit more now just a big powerful scrum and some big powerful running backs. They have skill, and there's a pity that players like Pat Lambie have had to retire because of um, injury. Yes, they did lose at the 2015 tournament, but they still managed to make the semi-finals. So they can find a way to get through. They've never failed to get to the knockout stages. The worst performance was in 2003 when they got knocked out at the quarterfinal stage and didn't play well in the group stages either. Although saying that, 2011 they didn't do great either. They got to the quarterfinals and knocked out, but uh, but I think I think, yeah, I think they did lose badly against Japan. But even with a very average side, they got to a semi final and finished third overall. Uh, do I see Zimbabwe playing? Yeah, I think they still do play Test cricket. They have played Test cricket for a while. They're just bottom of the Test rankings. Do I see Zimbabwe getting back to the level they were before 2000? It's gonna take some time, I think, with what's happened to the country uh, under Robert Mugabe and the economic problems that they've had. It's affected, and then the political issues they've had. It's definitely affected their sporting side of things, and especially the white athletes and the targeting of white farmers. That's put a lot of the wealthier Zimbabweans, especially of a white or mixed race background, have left the country and they've taken their money with them. And without investment and without money, sport struggles. We'll see what happens with Zimbabwe and their future. It's been a tough, I would say, 18 years for Zimbabwe. I think the last time they played in England was in 2003. That's when Jimmy Anderson made his Test debut at Lords, and I remember watching that. I remember watching Jimmy Anderson take his first wicket. Um, it's it's been a decline for Zimbabwe, but they still play Test matches. But they are the worst Test team in the world right now, and that's a shame because they've developed some brilliant players over the years, and they've had some great talented players represent Zimbabwe in the 80s and the 90s. Sam Curran's dad was a Zimbabwean Test player. Um, it's unfortunate what's happened in the last, I would say, generation, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it's it is what it is. Uh, Politics does have a massive impact on sport in some countries, and economics has a massive impact as well. And if uh, oh yeah, they were at the first. I think they were at the first two or three Rugby World Cups. At least they definitely qualified for one. What's happened to Zimbabwe is what it is. I don't think you can change the past. I don't think you can. I don't think you can take away the fact that, unfortunately, what's happened politically and economically has definitely uh, definitely taken the country backwards. Could have been one of the wealthiest countries, not just in Africa but in the world. And unfortunately, a 20-year uh, fight for what is now Zimbabwe, which was originally Rhodesia, and then a brutal dictatorship has left the country where it is. And sporting wise, yeah, that's not what it was. But no, there's been some great cricketers who've played for Zimbabwe and some great rugby players as well. And a lot of them ended up going to South Africa. I don't believe so. I know. I, it's an interesting one because obviously Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania and a lot of the East African countries have a large Asian minority population that have lived there for a couple hundred years, and they really have bought into cricket. I know Kenya have a cricket team. Uganda have a rugby union team. Kenya have a rugby union team, and Tanzania have play a little bit of cricket and a little bit of rugby union as well. But I think it's the climate. Nigeria is subtropical, and cricket doesn't work in a subtropical climate. It needs to have a dry period in like a dry season, and then in the off season it needs to rain. So summer here, you can have lengthy dry spells, so you can play cricket. Winter is too cold, too wet, and there isn't the light. Nigeria, it's a subtropical climate with to a tropical climate, and that's where cricket doesn't work. The West Indies, notwithstanding, the West Indies is the exception to the rule. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is a bit more tropical, uh, but we'll see. Richard Cross. I thought he would. I'm assuming that's the goalie from last night. I'm going to double check that. I was assuming he would go because he looked absolutely woeful last night. I think is that the goal kick? Let me just double check that. I can see that it was going to happen. He was absolutely woeful last night. When I say woeful, I mean I've never seen a goalie at any level in ice hockey be so utterly inept in a warm up game. You don't have to play your best. You just got to get your eye in and just work on your combinations, work on improving. I've never ever seen a goalie so bad. Uh, Let me just double check. Let me just double check that. I've got to find it now. England. I do. I'm assuming we're talking about football when it comes to Pickford. Pickford for me doesn't look like he commands his area. Good at shot stopping, not so good on crosses, not so good at reading the game at times. He's got too many errors in him. But I think there's an issue with a lot of England goalkeepers when it comes to football. So I will check. Right, no, that's what we know. We want that one. Stupid bloody Twitter. That's what we want. I do think when it comes to the England football team, yeah, I think the goalkeeping position, I think, is one of the weak points. And I honestly, wow. Let's see what it says. Okay. Then again, he hasn't got the best. That Richard Crowe hasn't got the best numbers. In fact, he's actually got some pretty shitty numbers. Actually, to be fair, the amount of games he's played, he hasn't got. That's not good. He already got rid of a player. That I thought it would be Goss, the goalkeeper, but it's not. I think Man United. Dean Henderson's he's third choice on the pecking list. You've got Sergio Romeo, who's a lot better than him, and David De Gea, who I don't actually think is as good as Sergio Romero. I think Romero is actually more positive in his goalkeeping, a bit more commanding. But if Dean Henderson doesn't get game time, he's not going to develop, and this is a problem. I think Pickford too many mistakes in his game, and then God knows. I think there is an issue with goalkeeping. I think Heaton and Pope at Burnley. Unfortunately, injuries hampered them with not being able to go to the World Cup. But I'm not 100% sold on Pickford. I think there's a few other young goalkeepers coming through, but when players like Ben Foster have had an unfortunate, how do I put it? Ben Foster's a decent goalkeeper. When an experienced goalkeeper like Ben Foster is misused by the national side and has been for years, and Joe Hart, I think he needed a confidence boost, and if that means giving him a game in a qualifier against any opposition, so be it. But I think, yeah, the goalkeeping position is a weak point for us. You need a goalkeeper to be commanding. I don't think we've got a commanding goalkeeper. Do I think I can hit 700 subs by Christmas? I think we can pass that before Christmas. Growth's been a bit slow in August and September. This is generally the quietest part of the year for you, for some YouTubers. Others, January is definitely a quiet part of the year. But it is what it is. Sheffield, the Sheffield Steelers, Cardiff Devils, and Belfast Giants are the top three British elite league clubs at the moment. There are a few others like Nottingham Panthers. They're your most successful ones. There are others floating around, but they are the best out of the lot. But it's a difficult one because Sheffield and Nottingham, they definitely Sheffield. Sheffield can support two professional teams. Sheffield is, I think, the heartland of British sport in the north. I think I honestly believe that Sheffield has produced top quality professional teams in a variety of sports for years. They've got one of the best teams in the British Ice Hockey League at the top level. They've got one of the best teams at the secondary level. They've got two well supported and historically successful football clubs in United and Wednesday. There's a big university sporting presence where a lot of the Sheffield Eagles in rugby league have a rich history and have won the Challenge Cup and have, I think, were founders of the rugby league as well. So Sheffield as a sports city is a really big sports city in this country. I think at rugby union, Sheffield do have a pretty average history in rugby union, but rugby league, ice hockey, football, cycling, swimming, there's a big uh, there's definitely a culture in that city of sporting success. A lot of Olympians have come through Sheffield. A lot of the Olympic um, uh, funding and Olympic training is done in Sheffield. There's a big cycling. Oh God, I'm trying to check so many things here. Oh, bloody. I'm trying to check on the internet a few bits and pieces. There's a big emphasis of sport in Sheffield. It's the same with Leeds. Leeds is another very sport mad uh, sport mad city as well. So it's an interesting one. But no, Sheffield is a sportsman city. Leeds is a sportsman city. There are some areas of the country that develop athletes in a variety of sports really well. I don't know. It depends. I mean, there's been certain spikes on the channel for subscriber count. Um, uh, and to be honest, that's down to the YouTube as well, giving the exposure to smaller channels, which they just don't do. They're just not giving the recommend, like putting the recommended videos. They're not really giving the the push and the drive and the exposure to smaller channels as they used to. I've That's why I use my Twitter. That's why I regularly retweet my videos. I used to share them on Facebook as well. Occasionally, I might post a video to Facebook as well. My actual personal Facebook. But we're getting there. And people continue to subscribe. There's one thing I was going to mention before I go, and that is the NRL. Now, I'm a Russian and not a crazy guy. That is brilliant. A question was asked, when is Ovechkin going to retire? I think he's got 5 or 6 years left as an NHL player. Kuznetsov, his Russian teammate and Capitals teammate, is facing a very lengthy time suspended. But I'm going to go finally finish on the NRL and something to do with stadium safety. The Manly Sea Eagles, who play in the NRL, play at Lotterland Brookvale Oval, which is a suburban ground, which is also set in the middle of a suburban park, similar to Hyde Park in a sense in size, or Richmond Park in London. It's transpired that the club stadium has passed safety inspection throughout the season to get its operating license to host games as a public venue. It's passed its inspection every year that the safety inspection that is in place under the current regime until last week when they found large amounts of asbestos in the stadium, which has now posed a threat to the future of the stadium as the home ground for the Manly Sea Eagles. That's something very, very interesting. So if you're an NRL fan, it could affect where they are now saying they are going to play a game there. The first weekend of finals, the Manly Sea Eagles will be playing at Lotterland Brookvale Oval. But it raises a question about how rigorously they found asbestos. But it raises a question about how well these checks are taking place. How well are they enforced? Because that means they found traces of asbestos. Asbestos has not been allowed as a building material for a long time in a lot of countries. The fact that they found it at a sports venue, which is also in a public park as part of the surroundings, is deeply troubling. Sports infrastructure is important, and as we've seen with Basingstoke, with Lotterland Brookvale is rented from, I believe, it's Warringah Council in Sydney. I believe the local authority in Sydney and that part of the city owns the stadium because it's in a public park, and that the Manly Sea Eagles have a lease agreement with the local council for the stadium, and part of the lease is paid for by their sponsors, which is Lottoland, which is the local one of the local national lotteries in Australia. But the fact that they found large traces of asbestos where people have been obviously going to matches all season, both at NRL level and reserve grade, which is the lower levels where the junior players play or the reserve teams play, is deeply troubling. And it does raise the question of stadium safety and security and then sports infrastructure. I thought I'll finish on that because that could actually affect where some of them, if the Manly Sea Eagles have a place to play, not only in the finals of the NRL, and if you don't know what that is, that's basically their version of the playoffs, but also next season. And interesting, very, very interesting. And there's been a big debate about whether the NRL should help pay for stadium refurbs and put money in to especially the smaller grounds in Sydney and elsewhere, or should they focus on building bigger stadiums where all the various, especially Sydney clubs, will share, like 3 or 4 clubs will share a stadium. A lot of fans want to keep their local stadiums rather than go to Bankwest or ANZ. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. So if you follow the NRL, that's a big story. But it is basically like saying, okay, a football stadium here. Let's go for a big club. Let's say, I don't know, what's a big club with an older stadium that's a bit older? God, we could say Stamford Bridge at Chelsea. We could go with Crystal Palace, Selhurst Park. That's one of the older stadiums in the Premier League. Turf Moor at Burnley. Let's say they've been selling out that stadium for a couple of years. It's passed safety inspection, and suddenly one day, a week before a crucial cup game, let's say Burnley have made a quarter final in the FA Cup. Let's say Crystal Palace have made a quarter final in the League Cup or something, and they're the home team. And the week before, they find traces of asbestos. Imagine the reaction, of football fans in this country if a major club in the Premier League who haven't won a trophy for a while, so I've used those clubs as examples, on an eve of a game which could get them into a final or a semi-final, their home stadium is found not to meet safety regulations just before a big game with a big rival. That could determine whether this team makes a final or a semi-final and progresses in a big thing like the FA Cup especially, and the stadium fails a safety inspection when it's been passing all year, has passed its safety inspection for many years. Imagine that. Imagine an NHL ice rink week before the Stanley Cup final. It's passed safety inspection. Let's say Calgary, for example, make the Stanley Cup final this year. The Saddle Dome is the second oldest arena in the NHL after Madison Square Garden. Let's say it's them versus. Okay, how do I put this? Let's say it's them versus New York, and for some reason both arenas fail safety inspection at the eve of the first match of the Stanley Cup final or the eve of Game 7. So they can't go back at the Saddle Dome, even though it's a home and away kind of reverse fixtures all the time. Oh, but we can't go to the Saddle Dome. It's failed a safety inspection. But so is Madison Square Garden. Oh God, that imagine the uproar when a arena has passed. You can see the frustration that fans would have. You can see it, can't you? That's a big. That's how big it has been in Australia. The reaction of fans has not been great. They've really not reacted well to one of the teams that's made the NRL playoffs, which is their finals. Imagine that. Yeah, especially in a league with more money in it and a bigger TV audience and bigger TV rights, more fans, that would not sit very well. Especially if it's a team that hasn't won for a long time and it's their chance to win their first silverware in a very long time, and suddenly they can't play their games at home. That would be really bad. I'm assuming you're talking about the Warrington Wolves and not Wolverhampton Wanderers when it comes to sport. But if it is Wolves that play in the Premier League, yeah, no, they are spending a lot of money on redoing their stadium. Wolverhampton Wanderers have spent a lot of money on redoing their stadium and refurbing and expanding. Several clubs right now are actually in the top 4 divisions are spending a lot of money on their stadiums and improving the facilities. What I find really interesting is ironically, a lot of clubs don't own their stadiums. They're relying on being tenants and relying on their landlords of their stadiums doing the investment. Not as many clubs own their grounds or arenas that you think they do. A lot of teams are tenants of the arenas and stadiums they play in. And they are reliant on the owners of those buildings being the ones to do the improvements and allowing them to do improvements. That's an interesting one. Chelsea have ownership issues with their stadium. Tottenham's rebuild of White Hart Lane massively overrun, and that was a very awkward situation with them getting favourable rule changes for them for some obscene reason. Some teams in the lower leagues don't own their stadiums. We've seen in rugby league, Widnes, they rent their stadium from the local council. The Bradford Bulls have allowed. I think they sold Odsal to the RFL, and now they don't want to stay there. They've gone to Dewsbury to ground share there, and so that's a big issue. Yes, the Russians and the Georgians, it's not just a trash issue; it's a political issue. Yeah, West Ham and the Olympic Stadium. That deal, and that agreement has become a political football between Boris Johnson, the old mayor of London, now Prime Minister, and Sadiq Khan, the current mayor of London and ex-MP. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So yes, the London City Stadium and the West Ham lease has become a political football in recent years, and it is a hot topic, as is Wembley and the attempted sale of Wembley. The FA trying to flog Wembley off for half price. Um, there are some concerns about some of our sporting infrastructure. Now we are having, as I say, some of these big tournaments: the Women's Euros, the Rugby League World Cup. We've just had the Cricket World Cup, Women's Netball, and we, as a nation of the UK, I mentioned the Commonwealth Games, Scotland and Manchester in my lifetime. We pulled off some big sporting tournaments: Rugby Union World Cup, um, in Wales in '99, in England in 2015. What gets me is we can pull off these international tournaments, but at club level, in various sports, there are issues with those stadiums. There are issues with those arenas and who owns them. And the club level is where your players develop for the international teams. Athletics clubs, a lot of athletics clubs don't own their running tracks. They have to rent them off councils or private ownership, and that's why athletics has a funding problem, because a lot of the money has to go into paying for the facilities, and and the same with ice skating. It's the same with figure skating. It's the same with speed skating, ice hockey. There's a reason why some sports have funding issues. It's not because the money isn't there. It's because the money has to be spent on leasing and renting the facilities for use. When they have match nights and they have competitions, a lot of the ticket money has to go and pay off that lease. Um, yeah, the Liverpool Window Arena is pretty good. There are some. Oh, Kirov. That's an interesting place. I was discussing Russia today with a work colleague who's from Finland. It is an interesting place. Is Russia? It's a very interesting place. It's such a vast country. Um, the history is amazing. The sports side of things, obviously, politically and some of the unfortunate things that happened with doping scandals and corruption is a shame. But the World Cup last year in the football was absolutely a brilliant tournament. I enjoyed it immensely. I really enjoyed the World Cup last year. Really enjoyed the tournament. And while it wasn't the best for action on the field for skill, um, the actual stadiums were amazing. The pitches were brilliant. The atmosphere was pretty good. And I think the organisers pulled off an amazing tournament, and it was a good advert for what Russia can be. And Russia has a lot of problems, but that was a very good advert for the for the Russian people. Um, Very interesting culture, very interesting people, very interesting history. I'm not overly scared of Putin. I think there's a lot of things we won't know until after he's from ousted from power in some way, or after he's passed on. Um, I think Russia's an interesting place, and sporting wise, it's a very interesting country. And the KHL is a league that I want to study in more detail, because it's the second or third, depending on your point of people's point of view, best ice hockey league in the world, and some very good players. Actually, he lives in St. Petersburg. He's not technically a Moscow citizen. He's a Saint Medvedev is from Moscow. Uh, Putin is from St. Petersburg. He's a massive fan of Zenit. He's a massive fan of SKA in the KHL. And what's the other sports team he likes? There's another sports team that he likes. But if you notice, Putin's fandom is of teams from St. Petersburg, because that's where he's from. Medvedev, his prime minister, who's also been president of Russia, is a Muscovite, whereas Putin is a St. Petersburg son. But very interesting country, and some of the sport, some classic names: CSKA, Torpedo Moscow, SKA, a lot of sports clubs, Dynamo, who in football and in other sports and ice hockey are household names, and even I know about them. Um, Obviously, it's been 8 years since the what was it, Yaroslavl ice hockey team crashed in the plane, and that's a sporting tragedy, and that's an interesting one. But no, Russian ice hockey, it's really interesting. You know, some of the greatest players to ever play the game are Russian. Uh, some of my favorite players are Russian. Um, I mean, Sergei Fedorov was one of the first players that I remember watching on the TV when I was a kid. You got Ovechkin, Ilya Kovalchuk, one of the best out and out goal scorers the NHL has ever seen, for points per game and goals per game. Some brilliant Konstantinov for Detroit. They say some brilliant NHL players. But oh god, if Yugoslavia didn't collapse into a brutal conflict, that's pretty much sort of simmering under the surface right now. I've been to the former Yugoslavia. I've been to Slovenia. I've been to Croatia. It's a beautiful part of the world. Really interesting people. But yes, you can just imagine if the Yugoslav nation was still a one nation, and but that's a utopian dream. There's a lot of distrust between the various Balkan states. Part of it's to do with religion, and nationality and language, and there's a whole host of other reasons. But yeah, Yugoslav football and basketball and handball. That's another sport people don't realise they're very good at. Montenegro, uh, pretty good at handball. Basketball, water polo. There are several sports that the Yugoslavs are very, 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 very good at. Um, Not so good at ice hockey, but most of their players were Croats and Slovenians. And Croatia and Slovenia only make up a proportion of what was the former Yugoslavia population wise, and you've got to have a kind of a player base, and not enough. Mostly the Slovenians and Croats played because of where that's where a lot of the ski resorts were, and a lot of the winter sports areas. Serbia, Bosnia is in the middle. Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, North Macedonia now. It is what it is. Yeah, Russia does have a professional rugby union league, but the players aren't paid massive amounts. There's a couple of top quality Russians playing elsewhere in Europe. Um, uh, it's a pity that the Russians only qualified for two Rugby World Cups before this one. But the Romanians as well, a lot of the ex-communist countries, Georgia, Romania, Russia, they do have very solid rugby teams because there was a lot of state funding in the Cold War, especially Romania, especially Russia. They put a lot of funding into their sports programs, and the Romanian national rugby union side was very well funded by Ceausescu. The Russians adopted it after World War II. They really wanted to get into Western, especially British sports. The Russians have a really weird relationship with the UK. So yes, rugby union became very very popular in Russia, and it still is. It's they do have professional leagues. They're not as the same standard as in France and in the Pro League and in England when it comes to rugby union, but yes, they do have them. They've had professional leagues in a variety of sports for a long time. Ice hockey and football, obviously, are the two bigger sports in Russia over rugby union, but they even play rugby league. Um, but the reason why the Romanians and the Russians and to a certain extent the Georgians have this infrastructure is the Cold War. It's the communist regimes of Romania and the Soviet Union put a lot of money into sporting infrastructure. They really put a lot of money into it. It was part of their foreign policy to actually use sport as diplomacy. They really put a lot of money into their sporting infrastructure, and while they're not as good as what they were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, um, the sporting infrastructure is still there, and the legacy is still there uh, from the fact that uh, um, you know they have these stadiums that are massive stadiums, and some of the sporting infrastructure is insane. But one thing I would like you guys to check out is the summit series between the Canadians and the Russians, or Soviets. Um, and Phil Esposito basically on live TV going after Canada lost, I think game one of a three-game summit series or something in the 70s. Goes why? And Phil Esposito is bearing in mind one of the best players ever to play in the NHL in the 70s and the 80s and the 60s, and to a certain point, I think it was a bit of the 60s as well. And the fans were booing. The Canadian fans were booing because the Canadians had lost to the Soviets. And he goes, and he really went and gave it both buckets. Why are the fans booing? We lost the game, but why are they booing? We playing our, we're the ones basically fighting and bleeding for this team. And they went on to win the series after that. The team went on and actually beat the crap out. And there was a massive moments in sports history that politics gets involved. But it's really interesting. I think honestly, you guys should definitely check out some of the Soviet and NHL Summit Series games over the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Um, really interesting. Really interesting. And there's another one where in the World Juniors, I think in 87, the Soviets are playing the Canadians, and it ends up in a massive, massive brawl. And one player of the Canadian team just sits on the bench and doesn't want to fight. He's not interested. And all the other players on both sides are, you know, uh, fighting each other. And this one Canadian player, and it's annoying me because I was watching a video another YouTuber did on him, and he's just sat on the bench, refuses to go over the boards and join in with his teammates against the Soviets. It's really funny. He just sits there, and it's a very famous mass bench clearing brawl between the World Junior Championship. So this is IIHF sanctioned tournament, and fighting is really frowned upon in that form of ice hockey, and they're just going for it. They just fight, and he just sits there. But no, the politics behind the Cold War and the sports, the massive state involvement in sporting infrastructure, for good and bad, and it is what it is. But it has paid off. Some of the best athletes to come out of Eastern Europe actually came about in the 90s and early 2000s was, I think, the peak of Eastern European sport was post-communism because of the aftermath and the legacy of the sporting infrastructure that the Soviet and communist governments put in place for 50 years. It paid off with a whole host of top quality football players, ice hockey players, boxers, wrestlers, cyclists, swimmers, gymnasts. A lot of them came through in the years following the collapse of communism because of the youth programs that they were part of before communism collapsed. So when they hit senior level, they had gone through this system that had been really well funded. And they came out the other side, and then it's the recent last 10, 15, 20 years where their nations have declined somewhat and not had as much funding go in because they're adjusting to free market economics. But it is what it is. Oh, look! When you have a state-controlled economy and the government is using sport as a political propaganda tool and is putting a lot of money into said sports or sport program and really investing for 5-6 decades, and then suddenly the investment goes away. It will not happen overnight that suddenly you stop producing athletes. But with the lack of investment or reduced investment and reliance on private firms investing the money, and corruption as well. Corruption's got a big part to play with the decline of the Russian, especially the Russian national teams over the years. part ice hockey notwithstanding, because they are amazing at that, but other sports. Um, there is a legacy, a positive legacy, but there's a negative one: the doping scandals, the corruption. That's something that, unfortunately, has tarnished the image of Eastern European athletes for a long time, and it has left a suspicion of any Eastern European athlete, especially a Russian athlete, of being dirty. Where not all of them are, but in order to get anywhere in sport in Eastern Europe, especially Russia, you have to have some form of government funding, really, or you have to have a wealthy benefactor, and it is what it is. You can't. It's a shame that a great sporting nation has undermined itself with dirty tricks, but it is what it is. Anyway, I'm gonna have to leave that there because I've got to be up for. Oh yeah, the East German women's swimming team and gymnastics team. Yeah. East Germany taking doping to the extreme. Understatement. Understatement. Absolutely. You just have to look at the sheer amount of steroids they were giving their female athletes and male athletes in the 70s, especially the East German swimming team of the 1970s, women's East German swimming team, is a scandal that should never be repeated. That was deliberate, not just the allegations against what we've seen with the Russians with state interference in fiddling doping tests for certain athletes, but an actual program to engineer superhumans, pretty much. And yeah, their doping regime was state sponsored, conducted under the auspices of the East German communist government, and the Stasi basically made sure that these athletes took their oh yeah, they are. One or two of them aren't, because they were quite happy to continue to get state funding, and they were quite happy to cheat to win. Absolutely. They had an opportunity to defect at every opportunity at every international competition. They chose not to. But yeah, there are those, especially the younger athletes, who are definitely victims of a not the most brutal communist regime, but of being seen as an experiment. And this is one of the reasons why people go, oh, if they're all cheating, they're all doing it. No, some of them were very, very young athletes who, as part of their compulsory military service, got involved in athletics or swimming or whatever the sport was, and were treated as human experiments by their government. And are they entitled to compensation? Probably. Should their medals be taken away? Well, if we're looking at individual doping offences for individual athletes, yes. Will they be taken away? No. The IOC and the IIF, and the IAAF, sorry, and the IIHF, and organisations like that who've awarded medals to the East Germans and other nations that had basically state-sponsored human engineering rather than just doping. They don't want to dig up the past from the 70s and the 80s and get rid of those records. Really, they don't want to touch the Cold War era of sport as much. The Seoul 88 Olympics onwards is where they want to really start going. We're going to take out that title away from you. A lot of the athletes are dead now, or have severe health issues, and it's not really worth digging up the past. But the Ben Johnson Seoul 88 Olympic 100 meter final, only one athlete never tested positive for steroids in his career, and he was the guy who finished last. That tells you all you need to know about the dirtiest Olympic final in history, where only one athlete out of 9 is clean his entire career. That tells you all you need to know. And Linford Christie was part of that final, and his reputation was tarnished. Carl Lewis, his reputation has been tarnished. They both continue to fully deny the allegations against him, but evidence says otherwise. And are they victims, or are they deliberately trying to cheat to win? Bit of both. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there because we could discuss the East German swimming team and their doping policies for hours. And yeah, a lot of the athletes are victims, but some actually willingly were like, I'm willing to cheat. And after the end of communism, look at the US as a training base. It's not just US athletes, it's athletes based in the US. And Mo Farah's old coach is linked to a doping scandal. So I'm just going to leave that there, and that's where reputations start getting clouded. And you look at what was Team Sky, which is now Team Ineos, and Chris Froome, and he's never fully explained some of his abnormal readings for some of his doping samples. And that finger of suspicion is there because of a sport that he participates in that's had a massive issue with doping. Lance Armstrong, Floyd Landis, Jan Ulrich, Marco Pantini, I could name the whole Festina team in '98, Vinokourov of Astana, Alberto Contador banned twice, still allowed to come back and compete a third time. Cycling has a doping problem and has that image and doesn't shed it. Athletics has the same problem. But I'm going to leave that there. It's been a really interesting live stream. Of course, we had a couple of idiots that had to be removed from the chat, but is what it is. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for all your questions and the topics we've discussed. And some of them weren't necessarily sports related, but we managed to get back to sport in the end. And we finished on doping scandals. I can definitely look into some of the biggest doping scandals in sports history. It's not just confined to athletics or one particular nation. It's now mostly athletes based in Russia and the US, without necessarily the state sponsor side of it. There's a corruption side of it. The US, it's individual training camps and individual coaches and their athletes agreeing to dope. Russia, it's more like state allowed cheating rather than state sponsored. They've sort of, it's not the same intensity as the Cold War, but it is what it is. But I'm going to leave that there. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for all the questions, and I'll have some more videos for you tomorrow. I'm too tired now. I've got to be up for work at 4:30, so I'm going to leave that there, and see you soon.